I decided to use my time to also share with you highlights of what I'm doing here, and also to share with you why I decided to come over. So people ask me all the time, why did you come over? And you've done quite nicely there. You have a very rich career. So the answer is definitely not because of the weather. But to make sure that I come, despite the weather, I had 2 interviews. There was in the winter of 2009. And they picked the 2 most severe snowstorms to invite me to come over. And I still came. So what I want to do today is really share with you the Israeli experience. I still remember it because it's only just over 2 years since I came over. And I had the honor and the privilege of being involved in quite a bit in what has become the high-tech industry of Israel. Has anybody read the book Israel Startup Nation? Oh, well, a few did. And let me make a disclaimer. First of all, I recommend the book. I didn't write it, so it's not a promotion. But I want to make a disclaimer. I think that at this juncture, I feel very comfortable about suggesting that Canada can start writing its book, Canada Startup Nation. I disagree with those who say that we are lacking entrepreneurial spirit. I disagree with those who say that we don't have enough technologies. It's not true anymore, and I hope that during the panel discussion, we'll be able to address the comparison between Israel and Canada, which is often being done by different people. But to be able to get started, I was looking for something that will be a trigger, and I want to read to you what it takes to become successful. No pessimist ever discovered the secret of stars or sailed the uncharted land or opened a new doorway for the human spirit. Any idea who wrote it? Helen Keller. So I think that if she was able to talk about optimism, we definitely can talk about optimism, and it's all about optimism. To be able to become successful in our business, you really have to be the eternal optimist. Can we educate people to become optimistic? Probably not. Can we educate people to become innovative? Probably not. But if you have it in your blood, or as they say, in your genes, it's a good start. And in the book of Israel Startup Nation, they describe how people become entrepreneurial in Israel. And it's really by default, because we don't have gold, we don't have oil, we don't have zinc, we don't have anything that is underground. We have quite a bit between the ears. But since I came, I learned that Canada wants to add another natural resource to whatever is available, which is to become a leader in high tech. And someone told me, Carl, that in a presentation you made 2 weeks ago, you suggested that this is a window of opportunity for Canada. I certainly subscribe to it. Look at what happened around us in the world. I think that Canada is now an island of sanity, and this is the opportunity in terms of taking whatever has been described as good ideas and look for commercialization, and I'll get to it. So back to Israel, because I believe that I had to bring the international perspective. Israel has developed its skills and acumen in the space because of the situation. And when you think of someone who is drafted to the military in Israel at the age of 18, by the time they come out, if they decide to do it part of their career, at the age of 27, they already ran a startup, they already had an international interaction, either in Silicon Valley or in Western Europe. They already got themselves a BSc and an MBA, and they already had the opportunity of running company, with one exception. There was no limit to the amount of money that they had because it was all covered by the government. Obviously, these days we don't have the privilege of doing so. When the State of Israel discovered that there is a potential in the high-tech space, the government came up, and we'll get to the government a little later. The government came up with an idea that we call in Hebrew Yozma. Yozma in English means initiative. And the initiative by the government was that we, the government, are prepared to participate in a new initiative of better funding of early stage. And they called upon the world to come to Israel and create a whole new program, which is the venture capital program or the venture capital industry of the State of Israel. So in the early 90s, the government committed $100 million, which turned into a $10 billion industry that is the high-tech industry of Israel that everybody talks about. And probably anywhere between 50 and 70 venture funds that are the outcome of it. And for those of you, and I believe that many of you are in the medical space or the healthcare space, I want to tell you that just before I left, I was party to another initiative which is called the BioYozma. The BioYozma is really everything we did in the 90s for the high-tech, except that it's now for the biotech. The net result of the BioYozma initiative of the government, which is now about $50 million to those who are willing to come and help us develop the biotech industry, is what we call now OrbiMed Israel. OrbiMed from New York, I'm sure some of you know them. OrbiMed came to Israel, ran a campaign which was very aggressive and turned out to be very successful, turned into $250 million early stage life science fund with $50 million of the government. I think today is a good day to talk about government involvement because we just heard the bad news that ORF has been postponed. Is postponed the right term, Carl? Okay, thank you. So the reason I talk about money and government is because of the fact that these two are intertwined and these two are key. But at the same time, there is another element, which is the people, or I should say rather the management. And speaking of the management, I recently thought of a nice way to portray it, and we talk about the 3 M's. The 3 M's, not the company from Minnesota, the 3 M's being the merchandise or the IP, which is in the early stage the merchandise. The second M used to be the money, now I changed the order, and the second M is the management, and the third M is the money. So if you have the 3 M's, you have a good chance of becoming successful. And I want to focus really on the management, because here we are at the Ivey conference, and Ivey took upon themselves the responsibility to educate us. So in many conversations I had with Laurie and with Ann and everybody else, I told them that I don't think that money is the issue anymore. Well, careful, Rafi. I'd say it's almost all about the money, but it's not all about the money. It's really about how you manage it. And I see some faces, familiar faces in the room, and I know that some of you have been engaged in more successful and less successful entrepreneurial initiatives. And the bottom line is that even if they give you tons of money and you don't know how to manage it, you're doomed to fail. So the message really is that we have to come up with a more creative, more innovative approach to how we establish the cadre of people who know how to do this. And I think that one way to do it is really learn from how they dealt with it in California, mainly Silicon Valley and San Diego. I don't think that we have something that's missing here. On the contrary, we're probably better off than them in several aspects of it. But the program, the package of education has to be addressed properly. So I already mentioned to you how people went about it in Israel. It's pretty much, for better or worse, through the military career of many of us. But quite frankly, you don't need to be drafted to the military to be able to do the right thing. So when people ask me, and they come quite regularly to ask us about what the best way to go about establishing a career, I think that my recommendation will be that you have to have in your skill set a combination of understanding of the technology and having some season, which is what you can learn from an MBA program. However, these are two critical elements, but insufficient, because there's no way you can replace experience with any of it. And I apologize, Anne, for the next statement, which is no MBA program can teach you what you learn day in, day out when you are in the industrial setting. And I think that based, and Carl is better equipped to suggest what's available in Ontario and across Canada in terms of industrial outlets, but there is tons of opportunities. We do not need to go south of the border, as they call it, to find the training programs. But Anne, I suggest that we establish a relationship between the academic aspect and the industrial exposure and training.